Recording in progress.
Welcome to the Village of Buchanan Trustees Board Meeting, Workshop Meeting of Tuesday, July 26th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. So, at our workshop this evening, the first person we have up is David Smith, who is our planner. He's going to give us an update on the rezoning of the M2 district, the Indian Point district. We had approved this last year to rezone the property to prepare for the future.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
Members of trustees. For the record, David Smith, Principal with Planning and Development Advisors. Last week, our office had submitted to you for your review and eventually for comment, kind of an update as to the M2 zoning. And I want to walk through some of the items that I need input as we move through the process. And I have a brief agenda that I'll go through. The first item is to review kind of the draft of a vision or a purpose statement, which essentially becomes the legislative intent of eventual zoning. The second is to look at the rezoning boundary and to look at some of the properties within the context of the entire M2 zone. To look at item 3 is to do a general review of the development criteria, which will help frame the zoning, the forthcoming zoning. And then last is to briefly go over next steps. So in the packet that you have, there's a vision statement that was provided as part of the village's ongoing LWRP. That's a local waterfront revitalization program process. And that vision statement helps set the framework for that document, that planning document. So I included it because it's an ongoing matter that the village is considering. And one of the comments that I had when a conversation with Marcus is, well, perhaps there should be some language about in here in the village, in the vision statement for the LWRP about inviting the public down to the waterfront. And I said, well, I think that's an appropriate comment, but it's separate from the process that I'm doing, and I think that because it's an ongoing process, you can continue to coordinate with those planning consultants. But the vision statement or the legislative intent that I provided is fairly comprehensive. I would encourage you to go through it in more detail. I can provide you with a Word copy version if you want to edit it on your own. I think that's most appropriate. But in summary, we talk about the importance of the Hudson River waterfront and what it represents to the village and to the region. And we note that it does provide, the zoning at least provides an opportunity to invite the public down to the Hudson River waterfront. I think that's one of the key goals as part of the zoning and for the redevelopment. Even though it may be a long-term event, but I think that's you need to have that as kind of an established goal. And we include reference to the LWRP process, which provides some framework. And I would also add that as we get to some of the other discussion points, we've reviewed the LWRP and we've included one of the survey results that the LWRP process included, and that helps inform this process as to land use going forward. But we note that in the legislative intent that one of the purposes of the redevelopment, obviously, is to encourage an economic stimulus and revitalization for the village. I think that's a critical component. The intent includes providing for well-designed development, comprehensively planned focus, making sure that there's a priority for waterfront compatible uses, achieving public access, and providing standards so that the village has some and can provide some guidelines to the development community when they eventually come to the village for redevelopment. So the legislative intent is essentially provides the background for the purpose of the zoning. So I won't go into any more detail other than you have that before you, and I would encourage you to go through it in more detail and provide us with some additional feedback when you get a chance. Now, task 2 in our itinerary includes setting the rezoning boundary. And in the package that we included, we have the M2 district, and then we have the individual property owners. And Marcus, if I could ask you to bring up that map.
Sure.
Okay, very good, thank you. So if you just go back one to the, there we go. So this is the, for the people at home and in the audience, this is an exhibit from Westchester County GIS, includes the entirety of the M2 district, which is on both sides of Broadway. It's approximately 320 acres, and that's the scope of what this office has been tasked with evaluating going forward. Now, Marcus, if you could just advance it to one screen. There we go, thank you. So within this, within the zoning district, you have essentially 4 property owners. You've got the Indian Point facility, indicated with the number 1. The Lafarge Gypsum, which is now certaintied, is an active waterfront use, indicated with number 2. Con Ed, indicated with number 3, and then you have the Village Property Lens Cove is indicated on the map. So essentially, you've got the 4 property owners. And one of the issues is essentially, we all know Indian Point is being decommissioned. It is in that process. So it essentially, at some point, those properties will become available for development. The Con Edison pieces, some are in active use, some are vacant. So there's opportunities there. But one of the issues that I wanted to raise, and Mrs. Serrano and I had a meeting with representatives from Certainteed a couple weeks ago, but that facility, which is indicated number 2 on the graphic, is an active operation. And so one of the things that the village has to consider, if you're going to rezone the M2 district and you're going to rezone it for certain uses, a use like that, and let me back up, I think some of the survey results, the survey results in the LWRP indicated that there was a preference for mixed use, primarily residential with a commercial component, introduction of open space as part of a redevelopment or a zoning concept. And so the Forge facility, that property, is an industrial use. So the question is, as you're going forward, if you rezone the property, rezone the entirety M2, including the Lafarge, that may become a pre-existing non-conforming use. Do I have that right? Yeah. I do, okay, very good. So it becomes a pre-existing non-conforming use. It's allowed to continue. There may be circumstances where if, let's say, there's the property, it burns down, and your legal counsel can opine in more detail. If the use stops for a certain amount of time, then they may not be able to continue. But the zoning may be put in place, and they would become this pre-existing non-conforming use. They would still be allowed to continue with their operations. So that's one of the considerations as we're looking at the zoning. Do you want to include all of the properties that are indicated in the M2? Do you want to carve out a piece, or do you want to just include the entirety and allow for the development to occur over time as you're contemplating in the proposed zoning? So don't need to have an answer tonight, but that's some of the thinking and some of the considerations that you as a village board, and part of your charge is evaluating zoning and land use. So we point out that for a property like that located on the Hudson, it has value for them because they have deep water access. They've indicated to us that they're a very active operation. They're in discussions with New York City to bring recycled wallboard up for processing at this facility because they do have a deep water access. So they're a viable economic use. They're water dependent. So it may be that they're just left there and they proceed on their own. And perhaps as time goes forward and they see that the other properties around them get developed for kind of this concept that everybody's contemplating, a mixed-use residential, that they may see more value in that than what they're currently operating under.
And I know, David, thank you for explaining that, because I know the original intent was just the Indian Point property. That's what was approved last year. So it's up to the board if they want to include, all of the M2 zoning.
Right. Well, my scope of work, just to make sure we're all clear, my scope of work included the entirety of the M2 district.
That's
So
correct. The Clark, our original planner, had agreed, and through our contract, to postulate a 257 acres. When they pulled out and you took over, that was one of the contentions that I had, was that your scope of work included the entire district of over 300 and some odd acres. Right. And that was discussed in depth, and that's one of the reasons why I voted against buying entering into the contract, because of that change.
Well, we went from 260 to 320,
Yeah,
so we've
yeah.
included the entirety of the.
The entirety,
Okay.
like I said, the original contract, when the guy backed out, wasn't for that property that you're talking about. It was only for the Indian Point property. But I didn't think that was right. I thought we should stick with the original intent of the original contract, even though you changed it. That's okay. No, I understand.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right, so the board will have to decide how to move forward if they want to include the whole
He's
M2.
already,
Yeah.
but his contract already stated the entire M2 district.
But
We already approved
what
it.
the approval, the resolution was on November 3rd was just the Indian Point property.
No,
No?
I
Well,
disagree.
If that's the case, I will relook
Listen,
at it.
I don't want to.
I know, we don't have to get into the mud over it.
The issue is
Okay.
that
Do we want to
for-
still go forward?
the scope,
With the
my
M2.
scope includes
Okay.
the 320. Now, if
Okay.
the village says, we don't want you to rezone the entire 320 acres, we only want 260, then you can do that. That's your decision. But I've been charged to look at the entirety of the M2 district, and that's what I'm doing.
So we will get back to you on that,
Yes.
too.
So, as part of looking at the zoning criteria, we've included as task 3 this general review of kind of the development aspects. And so the first thing typically when you're looking at zoning is, all right, so what's the land use? What do you want to have occur on different portions of the site or the entirety of the zone? And so we've looked at the LWRP summary. We've pulled out some of the components, and I'll just summarize here. What they've indicated, that a desire for creating publicly accessible open space, along with a mixed-use component of residential development with commercial components, including restaurant, event space, commercial activities, entertainment. So those are kind of a threshold, I think, of kind of the land uses that you would be contemplating. And with respect to residential, most likely it's going to be multifamily. You're going to have you may have a townhouse component. I don't think you want to encourage single-family housing there, but I think certainly a multifamily component, and a number of the waterfront communities up and down the Hudson have included a townhouse component, attached townhomes, as part of the development program. So in addition to those uses, there's some others that were also listed, including hotels and conference centers, ferry boat uses, marinas, charter excursion boat operations. So that's kind of the baseline for the types of uses. If going forward there are additional uses that you think should be incorporated, let us know, and we can kind of incorporate that as part of the drafting of the zoning language. And I think that's kind of, when you start to look at some of the other zoning districts for waterfront properties up and down, those are kind of the baseline that you find. And I think most communities understand that multifamily residential with a mixed-use component, some commercial component, is a development program that works, particularly within Westchester County, where you have a need for housing. There's a need for housing in the New York region anyways, but certainly within Westchester County. So the next criteria is building height. And building height allows for certain design considerations where you're concentrating the development in particular areas, and it allows for you to create almost like a cluster development, if you will, if you're familiar with that term and planning concept, where you're concentrating the development on a smaller piece of land, and then you have the open space around it. So I'm not sure what the appetite is for building height in Buchanan. In some communities, you don't have to answer that now, but in some communities, for instance in Sleepy Hollow, 65 feet, which is essentially between a 5- and 6-story building, is kind of where they settled. What I would offer for comparison, I don't remember, or I don't know off the top of my head what the height of the towers are on the Indian Point property, but that sets some precedent for the height of a structure. And I don't know if anybody in this room knows.
There's a building there already that.
Well, I'm talking about the towers now.
Yeah, the towers
Right.
are pretty high. You can
Pretty
see
tall.
that through most of the village, the towers.
Right. So that's a question that
Okay.
I would like you to consider. I think, 65 feet, I don't know if the building inspector isn't here, is he?
No.
No.
No, okay. So typically, 65 feet, that's like usually it's a 5-story building over what they call first floor podium, where you've got parking on the first level, and you may have parking below grade, or you might have parking on the first and second level, and then you've got essentially stick-built construction up above, and that's kind of where the construction in the building code process ends from an economic standpoint. Once you start going beyond that, it gets into a different construction technique, and there's different scales of economics with respect to development. And there could be a component where, and they did this in Sleepy Hollow, where you have a lower building height closer to the river's edge, and then as you pull back and get more towards the center of the site, the building height is allowed to go up. So that's also a consideration. We can do some evaluation on that basis as well. And I think that probably makes some sense, because I think part of this, and one of the other components is required open space. The Hudson River is your greatest asset down there, so you want to make sure that you've got public access, that you're creating kind of a green belt along the waterfront that's preserved and open and available to the public. And there may be other components to just having the open space. There may be public access to the river, whether you've got docks or piers or boat launches, something along those lines. But that'll eventually occur as part of the development process. So procedurally, there's a concept that I've found that works pretty well as part of the review that I've done for the GM site. And essentially, an applicant would come in at some point, developer, and they would apply for a special permit and for a conceptual plan review. And this allows the village, to evaluate their development proposal, to look at the environmental impacts as part of an environmental review, but without the developer getting into the real detailed site plan documents. And this allows the developer the opportunity to concentrate, kind of the efforts on looking at the impacts, and then once they have the entitlements, then going to the planning board for the very specific site plan review, where you're looking at kind of driveway access, you're looking at the architectural details, you're looking at landscaping and stormwater management and those types of things. So it's a kind of a bifurcated process. One is a special permit and concept plan provided at your level, and then going to the planning board for the specific site plan. And the last item that I'd like to touch on with respect to the zoning aspect is density. And this is always can be a contentious issue. But as we've looked at the various properties, and this was part of our earlier presentation, where we looked at kind of the individual sections. Marcus, maybe you could just quickly just go through. So we looked at, here's the parcel that's adjacent to Lentz Cove, and go to the next one. We'll just go quickly through. This is the site off of Broadway. Next one. That's the Indian Point property itself. That's really kind of the hole in the donut, which is going to be long-term, but the properties on the outside have kind of a more immediate aspect. Here's the Certainty or Lafarge property. This one is Con Ed. And this, I believe we shared this with you. This is a graphic that indicates the gas transmission lines and the overhead power lines, which becomes a factor when you're looking at development. So as part of this exercise at a very basic level, we think that there's approximately 170 acres for development purposes, and this is kind of a back of the napkin type of evaluation where we understand that you need to have land accounted for as part of utilities, access, open space. We understand that there are environmental issues on some of the properties with respect to wetlands and steep slopes, and those will be accommodated in more detail as part of environmental review. But in general figures, general terms, we've used that 170 acres as kind of a baseline. And just looking at, and this is, I think, an important issue for you as the village to start to think about, is kind of the density of development program. And we looked at your C1, C2 overlay district and said, all right, so if you had, kind of the 170 acres, what does that translate into? Using a zoning parameter that you already have in place. And so and this is just a general term, 1,300 units. Okay, so that's kind of a figure that we're just going to throw out there for consideration. But when you start to compare that to other communities have different density calculations, and this is important. So as an example, in Sleepy Hollow for the riverfront development, they have a permitted density of 20 units per acre. Now, when they got approved, they didn't get 20 units per acre. They got something less than that. But here's the kind of where I think it's important for this discussion, is that with the General Motors property, the cleanup was incumbent upon the property owner, which was General Motors. So the village understood that they needed to have the zoning in place that was dense enough to allow for an economic recapture of the cleanup costs, the site preparation costs, to allow for that development to happen for redevelopment purposes. And the village understood that, and they knew that that was kind of the trade-off of losing that facility and allowing for a redevelopment that they wanted to see happen. And they went through an extensive public involvement process when a developer was finally chosen. Now contrast that to, and Marcus and I had a discussion about the Tarrytown waterfront, and their density was much less, but they had a different approach where they had a kind of a baseline density, and then they allowed for increments of added density if the developer provided certain community benefits. And, recreation center, they contributed to a new village hall, and they did some other things. So there is, and my understanding based on my discussion with Marcus is that Holtec they're being provided funds from the federal government for the cleanup. So essentially that's not true?
The money is is, oh gosh, I forget how many billion now. So they're not, the money that they're using is money that's been there for the cleanup. So the federal government isn't supplying any money for that, but the federal government is reimbursing them for the spent fuel that's left on the pads there. So Holtec would have to sue the federal government, the Department of Energy, and then they would be reimbursed for the storage of the spent fuel. But the money that's being used is not federal money for the cleanup.
Oh, yeah, but there's money set aside for the decommissioning. I think that's the point. that
Right,
he's trying to
correct,
make.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I guess
But
that's
it's
the
not
point, is that
feds.
there's money set aside for the cleanup. So there's perhaps a different scale of economics where you may want to consider something like the Tarrytown approach, where that property owner may not need the extensive density in order to recoup the investment, or to cover their investment. So that's, I think, an important discussion to have, is really kind of that focus as to whether it is something where you need to provide additional density to have something happen, or allow for kind of this bonus program to achieve certain things. Because the village ultimately, I think, is going to want to have certain amenities down at you may want to have an amphitheater, you may want to have other improvements to the Lens Cove or to other properties that may come into your possession as part of the redevelopment program. So we don't have to have an answer tonight, but I think there's two different, as I was discussing this with Marcus, there's kind of two different approaches to the zoning aspect and to the redevelopment aspect. And I think they're both important, and it would be, as we get into this in more detail, I think we'll have a little better understanding of, I think, what's a better approach for the village of Buchanan. So, and it's noted that, once the zoning is in place, and that a developer ultimately is going to have to come back to the village with a proposal, and they're going to have to go through the environmental review process. That's the state environmental quality review, and that's where they're going to get into the specifics about looking at impacts on traffic, water supply, sewer, impacts to the school, and all of that. So there's still a very comprehensive environmental review that will be done once a specific proposal is in place. So for me, what I need to have in the short term is some additional input from you as a board to provide me some guidance on what we've presented to you tonight and how we've framed it. My next step is really to begin drafting the zoning text itself, and then present that to you. And at some point, you may want to have, and it's just a suggestion, having a joint meeting with your planning board, if you think if that input would be helpful. You're going to have a public hearing, obviously, at some point. There will be referrals, mandatory referrals or statutory referrals to Westchester County, New York State, not only New York State DEC, but New York State Department of State, because you have an LWRP, and they're going to want to evaluate the zoning and how it meets the LWRP goals and objectives. So there's still a fair bit of work that the village has to do before we get to kind of the adoption process. But I wanted to at least give you an update as to some of the critical thinking that we have as we've been moving forward. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. So in your vision statement, it talks about parks, trails, restaurants, recreation, historic and cultural attractions, and other businesses and tourism. Doesn't say anything about any industrial or any manufacturing that's currently there. It's when we first discussed changing the zoning, I had suggested to the rest of the board members at the time that we come up with a separate formula where we have a good tax base. The village has always been based on industrial and manufacturing. That's what supported our tax base for over 43% industrial. That's why we're able to survive. And I wanted to get away from an entire residential and entire, basically, mixed use. I wanted to have a good tax base. And this vision statement basically gets rid of that whole thing. And you had alluded to it when you talked about the legislative intent, about the pre-existing nonconformances. When we have a pre-existing nonconformances, not only will the owner be subject to a loss if they lose 50%, they have to come to the current zoning. They cannot expand either. Lafarge, or the gypsum maker, has expanded several times over the last 20 years or so. They would be prohibited from doing this. Back in the early 2000s, one of the companies had postulated putting in gas turbines next to the gas line. That type of industry would also be prohibited. That's not the vision that I have for that property. We have to maintain our industrial base, maintain our tax base. It has to, we need it so we can supplement all the other nice to-dos down on the northern part of the parcel. It also says encourage phasing out the land uses which are incompatible and detract from the village's Hudson River waterfront. So I can only postulate from this statement and from what you had stated is that the future of the village is not having that type of industrial down there. Is that the way other people interpret it?
The
We've also-
original intent was for the rezoning of this property was for the future. So we know with the intervener that we got involved in, one of the agreements was the north 60 acres that we were continuing to discuss and work on that being released. So I think that would be the first property that would be available. The middle property with the decommissioning, so I'm separating it into three, the waterfront into three. So the middle section, because of the decommissioning, because of some of the contamination, you might be looking at 15 years from now. I'm not sure how conducive that will be to residential at that point. So, but that's going to be the last property that will be looked at. To the south, closer to Certainty, that can be a lot of different things can happen there. But the original goal was, when we started this, that we were going to rezone, it was going to be for the best and highest use. And up and down the river, you see the development that's happening is mostly mixed use. And my understanding, when you get to industrial, you don't get the tax base on that with industrial. I think the mixed use gives you more tax, and if we could have a tax person speak to us about that so that everybody understands the different levels of, industrial, mixed use, whatever, whatever the zoning that the board would like to see. But that was the goal. One of the big things on the surveys with the LWRP was access to the property, access to the river, because we really haven't had access. We've done without access to the river for over 60 years because of the power plant. The one thing I would like to see, I personally don't want to see industrial there. I'd like to see some type of mixed use, but I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to catch heck for it. But you see in Oyster Creek that Holtec and Entergy are working together to have SMRs, the small modular reactors. So that's going to be the up-and-coming technology. So I'm saying this, I'm sure I'm going to get publicly shamed, but I wouldn't have a problem seeing that on the middle property if that's a possibility. But that's, you have to look at the leadership. I have to give New Jersey credit for actually looking at that to go into that new technology. So that was our thought at the time, the best and highest use. I just want to comment, it's the decommissioning fund that was set up, that has been set up. So that was, the last I heard was $2.2 billion, but with the stock market, I'm not sure where that money is now. I don't know how that was invested, but a trustee is in control of that money. And that money is to be used to do the decommissioning on the property. So that's my thought. I'm kind of looking to stay away from industrial. I don't want us to get into a situation again. And this, we're talking about the future here. And boards down the road in the future could change that if they want. But because things change. Things happen, things change, things come up, things are better technology, different things. So, but I'll be long gone by the time this whole property is done. I'll be pushing up daisies somewhere probably. But, we just want to get a vision for that waterfront for the future. And we just, like I said, the best and highest use, we want to see that done.
So getting back to my original comments, it also says to prevent activities which cause water and air pollution. What kind of activities are you talking about?
Activities that
You can't have
produce.
vehicles or, the air pollution, air quality, water pollution, water quality is already governed by the DEC. There's plenty of state laws that have to come into account when we do site plan approvals, do the engineering review, the seeker review. I just think that's just another statement to limit the type of use at the site from getting away from a manufacturing use, which the air quality and water quality is governed by the state anyway, you know? So I don't believe, one thing that I do like in here is the procedural review, where it says the first step would be to provide a special permit and approval of a concept plan. That should be included in our zoning no matter what. It doesn't have to be just this rezoning. It should be in our zoning book to allow for uses that aren't currently postulated. We've discussed several times about people who've come before us and they can't develop their project because it's not a permitted use, and our code specifically states anything not stated as a permitted use in our table of bulk regulations is prohibited. So I've felt then, I feel now, that this language should be in it no matter what, if we agree to the zoning change or not. Because the person who wanted the limousine thing here, the guy who wanted the medical facility on Greentown Road, it could have been allowed, or it could have at least been discussed. But we're not allowed to issue permits or applications for a non-permitted use. We keep talking about the survey. If I remember correctly, I haven't read the LWRP in a while, but I think there was only like 500 or 550 respondents, the majority of which were not village residents. Does anybody remember how many village residents were?
I think it was
like
about 100.
35 or
I think it
100?
was about 100.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
It was low.
that's 5% of our population or less than. We can't really base the survey on 400 or so residents from the outside of the village to determine what's best for the village, you know? So I know once that came about, and we had discussed it before, we talked about having another survey, but we usually get poor responses from surveys. So you know, all of those survey things, like I said, was a very small population of village residents that responded to that. I had originally, when we discussed this, I had suggested a 40% industrial and manufacturing with a 30% residential and 30% mixed use. We had talked about the northern part of the parcels that were the 65 acres. We'd also discussed splitting it up into different zones. So I think this as a whole, it doesn't meet my expectations or my vision for the future, especially when it comes to the vision statement and the legislative intent, because we can't expand upon our greatest asset of a tax base, our manufacturing. I know there are different calculations, you know, but even Jupiter had come in and talked, had postulated coming into the gypsum plant. That would be prohibited right now if this zoning text amendment were to pass.
I'm sorry, what is Jupiter?
Jupiter is a battery storage facility. They wanted to put in 250 megawatts of battery storage on the Lafarge site. But because Lafarge would now be deemed a pre-existing nonconformance, that type of manufacturing or that type of industry would be prohibited. And that's just, you know, that doesn't use up any services, that doesn't put kids into school, it just contributes to the tax base. So those are the kind of things that we shouldn't be eliminating, we should be fostering. And that should be in here someplace. When you talk about the heights, there is somewhat of a contradiction in your legislative intent, where it says encourage, what does it say? Allowing the views of the Hudson. What does it say? Achieve public access, provide standards of development in such fashion to create district waterfront district. Talk about allowing views of vistas of the Hudson, and currently we're allowed 35 feet. In the back here, you're suggesting 65 feet, so that's kind of like a contradiction.
Not necessarily.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
If you're designed correctly, for instance, if you have your street grid on that property, if you have the street ends pointing towards the water, that preserves riverfront views. That's a technique that's been used. And you also have this gradual, you can have the graduation we talked about of building height, not necessarily having the tallest building height closest to the water. So there are techniques that you can use as part of zoning and design to preserve views to the water.
So you're saying that we could go, just as a suggestion, 65 feet in the M2 zone? That would not fall over to any of our other zones, correct? Can we allow 65 feet in one zone and 35 feet in another zone?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
On the GSB building over there, Sean, how many, is that 5 stories?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's 4 or 5 stories.
And the open spaces. Okay, it says the village should consider codifying requirement access along the Hudson River as part of any redevelopment that includes access to the water. During the course of the future environmental review, there are also opportunities for the creation of publicly accessible open space as part of the site plan review. So how would you codify that? Because currently, the planning board can request that in their site plan review. How would you codify something like that?
So the way you could codify it is by indicating that there's a minimum distance. As an example, I'll use the GM site. There's a requirement for a minimum, I believe it's a minimum of 20 feet along the entirety of the waterfront. And I think at least 10 feet of that has to be paved for public access. But during the course of the environmental review, the village, as part of this design and part of this looking at comprehensive, design and open space, actually has a minimum of 100 feet around the entirety of the proposed, or of the development program. So along the Hudson River waterfront, you have at least 100 feet of open space. And I would invite you to go down there. As part of that project, the developer was required to build a waterfront park, waterfront open space. It's been completed. They're finishing up on their building certificate of occupancy and requirements. But that was part of the process that the village went through. So they had a minimum. They worked with the developer as part of the site plan and the conceptual plan review, and they were actually able to get additional benefit for their residents as part of that process.
If I'm not mistaken, along Lake Miho, there is a similar circumference around the lake that is not part of the owners. However, nobody from the public has access to it, because in order to access that buffer zone, you would have to go through somebody's property. So that's why I'm wondering how you could write something that says you have access through this person's property or that person's property to get to the public property.
Yeah,
You'd have to put together easements.
You may do an easement. The property may actually be offered for dedication to the village. Typically, you're not going to want to go through a design process where you're creating this exclusivity, or you have to cross somebody else's land in order to get onto the waterfront. I think the whole purpose behind kind of the zoning and the LWRP is to provide public access, unfettered public access to the waterfront.
And there are a lot of references to the LWRP. As you know, it's not been an approved document, and our representative has stated it's probably not going to be an approved document for a couple of years. So it's kind of hard to use a document that's not approved, that I don't even know if the rest of the elected officials have reviewed, as a governing document for this type of zoning.
Well, if the village adopts the LWRP, then it will be a governing document. Until then, it does provide some guidance as to the thinking of the public that's at least participated as part of that process. And that's the way we've intended it, is that it provides some guidance for us as we're moving through the process.
No, I understand it could be definitely used as a tool, and it does have a lot of good information in there, but there are a lot of things in there that are ambiguous, that I feel are ambiguous. But there again, like I said, my main objection is the excluding the industrial manufacturing in your legislative intent, as well as in your vision statement, and I think that should be changed. I know I absolutely cannot vote for this in its current form. Thanks.
I think with some of our latest developments, the latest housing developments that we did were on the lake, and I think probably one of the biggest mistakes is that there was no public access to it. And the public access could be something so simple as a cutout. And so, where is it? Lake Drive, for example, we have a pumping station there. So looking back, maybe there could have been some kind of a drive-in or something where people would have access to that. But both of those areas, well, all three areas, it was all homeowners that have owned the properties there. So hindsight, they maybe, that would have been better if people had access. We do have a little access, very tiny, like two-car access off of Westchester Avenue onto the lake, where people can go and they fish and things like that. So they can get to the lake that way, or over in the Verplank area.
So, well, here you're starting with more or less a blank slate.
Right,
I
right.
think
So,
that's
yeah,
the advantage that the village has going forward.
And I've been thinking, because even at the LWRP meetings, they're in the town, so maybe, people don't want to drive out to town hall. One of the things I was thinking, maybe we can get some interest, and maybe it'll be the beginning of September, but maybe we could get those posters, because you were at the LWRP meeting, and it explained everything, and maybe we could get more feedback from the Buchanan residents if we had something here. I was thinking maybe something at the pavilion, like an ice cream night, maybe that would attract them to come out to, come in, at least look at the LWRPs
Sure.
and make some comments.
Sure.
Because we really want to have the input of the village residents on this. And I'm going to get in trouble again. I'm going to be publicly shamed, but it's okay. Not here, but when we go to the decommissioning meetings. So at the last decommissioning meeting, I don't really want to say environmentalist. I don't know what I want to say. Clearwater, Riverkeeper people, they're pushing to have solar panels on our Indian Point property. And we had discussed this before, and I said, no, we're not putting solar panels. The village is currently looking at changing the zoning there, and we certainly are not looking at solar panels. And as we see, there's a lot of information coming out now about solar panels, and at the end of their lifespan, 20 to 25 years, they have to go to landfills, the concern of contamination of groundwater. And then there also are reports, I think it was in Bloomberg not too long ago, about the windmills, which also find their way into landfills. So they're not technically green energy, and they're not there yet. It's not there. So, that didn't go over well, but that's how it is. We're looking for the best and highest use. When you go to upstate New York, a lot of the farms, because the farmers are struggling, would turn their property over to solar panels, and you don't get a lot for the acreage up there, but it's something for the farmers, so they've accepted to do that. I could see if we have buildings such as Certainteed. A couple of years ago, that was the largest building in the state that had solar panels. So if you want, I wouldn't have a problem with it being attached to a large building, but to use up our property that we haven't had access to in over 60 years, that's not a good use of the property. So I'm sure I'll take heat for it, but that's okay. And I know, Sean, you said something about that medical facility, and we were interested, but you're right, it wasn't in the zoning. So I don't know. That's something we can discuss, and it just depends on the waste and different things. I mean, but we could talk about research, like possibly a research facility. I don't know, what the board would think about that. What else? And the battery storage. I think it's a good time to have that discussion now. So Marcus and I met with Juniper, whatever, and we had a discussion with them, and we wanted to know what they were actually looking at doing. So they have spoken to the school, And that didn't go, because they want to do a battery storage facility over there. So that didn't work out for them. They contacted Holtec. Holtec was not interested in letting go those properties in that area. They've contacted the town. They were in discussions with the town. The town was all hot on it and came to me and said, this is great, you should really do this, you should put, and I said, well, you have 99 acres of Con Edison property. Perhaps if you think it's such a good thing, you could always put it there. The other thing is, so they're looking at the parking lot and the Certainteed parking lot in that area there. So we asked different dimensions, and so they're looking to put a 1.6 acre building to start. So Marcus and I asked them different questions. And Marcus, what was the amount of, was it megawatts?
According to a 1.6 acre building, it'd be 250 megawatts. Enough energy to put back into the grid about 1 to 2 hours worth of electricity back into the grid.
So I think that speaks volumes that it wouldn't be cost effective for them to do one. And they would need, and the benefit to them is that we have the switch yard right across the street, the Con Edison switch yard. So they're looking to come in here pretty close. So my only concern is how many of those buildings in the end are they going to need? And when we talk about tax dollars, we actually had a conversation about that. And so for that 1.6 acre building, it's a 1-story. It would be approximately 500,000? Total. But that's not everything for the village. That's not what the village receives, because out of the total taxes, the school takes the bulk of it. And then, so the village, we are approximately like 16%. So you're looking at, okay, just 80,000 for that. But now my understanding, Marcus has done some research where they have other facilities, they ask for a pilot. And I'm going to leave it up to the board. I mean, I am not for this. I'm concerned. They're lithium-ion batteries, which they can be dangerous. You see, there was a bus up in Connecticut that went up in flames, lithium-ion. I don't know. I just think that there could be a better use for that property. And I don't know, do you want to see, I don't know, does the village want to see maybe 10 of the 2-acre, almost 2-acre buildings? And they're cement buildings, they're just basic buildings, they're nothing, So, but that's my thought on it, that's how I look at it. But, like I said, the board is going to have to make that decision.
So why doesn't Jupiter come and give a presentation in public?
Would the board like the Jupiter to come and make a presentation?
Yes.
Okay. And also, what I would like to do, because it will be a sales pitch, they're trying to find property here, I would like to find an independent company, an independent person that knows something about these battery storages, and I'd like them to also present so we can get both sides of the picture. And I will do that. I will find somebody. Okay, so do you want to do that? Marcus, can you recontact them and then they can do their presentation? Okay? Okay. And I don't know, we'll see their availability. It's either going to be the workshop or I don't know what our agenda looks like yet for next week, and it's kind of a short notice. It's kind of a week notice, so. What else? Do we have anything for Mr. Smith here? Anything else?
Yeah, my question was
Sure.
on the Sleepy Hollow project that you were discussing.
Yes.
You mentioned something about this bonus program. Is that the avenue that they pursued down there? Are you allowed to disclose whether or not that's the avenue they went down, or did they go the other route?
So there were 2 examples I used. One was Sleepy Hollow, one was Tarrytown.
Okay.
The
sorry.
one in Tarrytown is the one where in the zoning they have the bonus provision.
Yep.
Depending on what the community benefits are offered. And that becomes a weighing and balancing on the community's part, of what is the density that's being provided and what is the community getting back in terms of the benefit. So that was part of that review process. And Sleepy Hollow is a little bit different. They had, as part of the environmental review, they had certain improvements that needed to be made, and it ended up in a lawsuit, and eventually it was settled. And the way it was settled is that the GM and ultimately the developer needed to provide what's called the developer's maximum contribution, and it's a fund, and it's parsed out based on the incremental development program that's approved. So they came in with their initial site plan application, and I forget the dollar amount, but it was like $1.5 million was provided to the village. The next threshold is coming up where they have the 300,000 square foot of development that has been provided a certificate of occupancy. So that's another chunk that becomes available. And then shortly thereafter, there's another threshold. So that's kind of the way that program worked in Sleepy Hollow. But again, there were different considerations with respect to the cleanup objectives of the site and you know, kind of the responsibility. So it was easier to go through kind of the bonus process in Tarrytown because they had a kind of a lower threshold, excuse me, for the cleanup efforts.
Okay.
So and that's why I raised the issue about kind of, you know, like who's funding the cleanup and how does that work kind of from an economic standpoint, so that you have a better understanding of
Yep, understood.
how to approach the development program and the zoning.
This is all kind of a learning curve for all of us, you know, we got one time to get this right, I've said it before, so we want to just slowly proceed and do the right thing for the village.
But I think to your point about community engagement, perhaps having that next meeting with some of the examples of the LWRP that are presented in the LWRP to piggyback on this discussion, this broad discussion of the zoning and the uses and the program may be appropriate and provides you as a board with more context as to what the public is looking for down at the waterfront.
Okay.
Can you just remind us, the LWRP, did that encompass the entire M2 district? Because if I recall, the questions were more geared towards, you know, the actual waterfront, Lens Cove, the property Indian Point, but it didn't really incorporate questions as far as some of the Con Ed parcels or parcels further
Actually, Marcus,
north.
do you have the
That I
reference?
remember.
The entire village is including LWRP.
But they did look at, and they asked specific questions about the Indian Point property
Yes.
as part of that
Right.
process.
And my other question, too, I know you had mentioned a meeting that was held with Certainty. Can you just provide a little bit more information? You know, what was the intent with that meeting? Was there any other meetings with the other property owners?
So Marcus and I have had a virtual meeting with Holtec, kind of at the beginning of the process. And then at one of the LWRP meetings, there was an attorney there who was representing Certainty. And because they are a stakeholder, it makes sense to reach out to them, let them know what's going on. So we met with them maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was, to me, it was very beneficial because I learned more about their operation. They're one of 3 facilities, if not in the eastern part of the United States, in the entire United States. So they have a pretty active operation. They run 24/7. We found out that they have issues with trucking and how their trucks come to the site. In fact, I just took a picture of one of their signs off of 9A as you came in here.
Yeah, it's
to
on the
reroute
exit-
the trucks.
the
to
exit
a
ramp,
certain way.
Yeah.
And to understand, you know, they're a 24/7 operation. They've got a business model where they're looking to, as I mentioned, take recycled wallboard from projects in New York City and repurpose them as part of their business operation, which is kind of a sustainability component to what they're doing. They do not want to leave.
Okay.
They've made an investment. So I think it was important to understand, you know, where they're coming from and to let them know, yeah, the village is considering this rezoning process. It's part of a public process. They're what I would call a corporate citizen of the village of Buchanan. So they have a right to participate in the process. And so that's why I thought it was important. They're one of 4 major property owners in that district. And So that's why we felt it was important, at least I felt it was important to reach out to them.
Their use would be non-conforming if rezoned. What about the other properties? I mean, Con Edison, would their property be non-conforming as well?
Well,
How does
with
that
the
work?
exception of the switchyard, and I'm not exactly sure how it's listed in the table, the schedule of regulations, but essentially most of the, like for instance,
Vacant.
Con Ed's property is vacant. So anything that you rezone it to, there's really no conflict with a pre-existing use. I think the only issue is really with that one piece, with the certainty piece, and that's obviously a discussion item for you as a village, as you want, how you want to see that property treated going forward.
Did they mention if they would have to build another building for the recycling of the old material?
They did not mention that.
Just curious.
Lafarge had previously, as part of their consent order with the DEC around 20 years ago, had to incorporate their slag pile into their manufacturing. They already had that ability. They expanded their project around 2007 to include synthetic gypsum, which included increasing the grinders, changing conveyors, because it's a physically different type of product. They then had postulated expanding their project once again to bring in more natural or a more natural product. So they have expanded several times over the last 2 decades, and that's one of my problems, is they're not going to be allowed to do it anymore.
Well, I think, they're certainly put on notice that the village is contemplating this evaluation of the zoning, and if they have future plans for expansion, they should let you know.
Well, they did have future plans. They actually were in front of the planning board around a couple of years ago, but when the company changed hands, they had different goals at the time. It's not to say that those goals won't be realigned to the previous goals, but they had postulated some other stuff.
They're put on notice, that we met with one of the representatives and with the attorney. We told them we're meeting tonight. So if they have plans for expansion, they should let you know. You
So,
collectively as the village.
When you say they've been put on notice, what does that actually mean? That they
Meaning-
should come to us for any changes that they want before the zoning is changed? Or should they come and voice their opinion on either being in favor or against it?
They should voice their opinion.
Okay.
As I mentioned, they're a corporate citizen of the village of Buchanan. They have the right to express their opinion as to future land use, particularly when it affects their property.
The reason why I ask is usually when somebody says, I put this property owner on notice, that means that you better do something or something else is gonna happen. That's what it comes to my mind when I hear
Putting
that.
them on notice means we're in this process, you know about it, you understand where we're going. Their attorney is pretty sharp, and if they don't participate, I don't know what to tell you.
No, just to me, it has a negative connotation. You say,
No,
we've
not-
informed them of our plans, we're looking for feedback. That would be something that would be more, less adversarial.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be
That's okay, I just
adversarial.
didn't know what the intent was, because we weren't involved with these discussions, so we don't know what the manner of the conversation was.
So you've also had the conversation with Holtec also about what we're looking to do with the rezoning?
The conversation we had with Holtec was much earlier in the process.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that I suggested to Marcus, that shortly after this meeting, is we have the same kind of thing, just to give them a heads up. Here's kind of where the discussion has been going. Here's kind of what we've had, and just get their feedback, that's all. They're a stakeholder, they're a corporate citizen, and we just wanted to provide them with some input and allow them to provide some feedback as well.
Right, but given our current situation, I'm sure they understand that this is a possibility. I'm sure this didn't come out of the blue,
Oh, yes, yeah.
okay?
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean,
Well-
we've got to look towards the future,
They're
so.
decommissioning the plant and trying to get the property ready for redevelopment. What that redevelopment is part of this process.
But I'm saying even Lafarge or certainty, I'm sure they, it didn't come as a surprise, I'm sure.
No.
I've had conversations with them on what we're looking to do, so. Is there any other questions or comments? Should we include David in the Clean Path discussion also? Okay, while you're
Might
here.
as well, probably.
So,
Clean Path?
So I was approached by Clean Path, which is a company that will be bringing renewables from upstate New York. And, there's a bottleneck with our transmission lines. So what they want to do is come down the river, come in through our area, and go down 9 or 9A on the right-of-way, 9. And what they want to do is go back into the water again in Ossining, because in our area, there are some DEC-sensitive areas, and the DEC is not, yeah, and they're not allowing it. So that's why they're coming inland, going back to Ossining in the water to Astoria. It's a DC line that's coming down, so they will go to Astoria, Queens, and that's where they'll, I think that's where the buzz machine will be for them, where they'll convert to the AC and supply power for the city. So when they approached me, I had a few questions for them. My biggest question was, so what's in it for the village? So crickets, and I said, so listen, guys, you got to understand, we just lost half of our revenue. So is there some type of a utility tax you would pay? Is there something that would benefit the village? I wanted to get the whole picture. No. So I said, hey, listen, I've got a really good idea for you. If you go over by Charles Point there, almost in that park area, the walking path, come up that road, Louisa Street, come up that road, and you'll be able to go right into the 9 on the side of the road there, the easement, and go down to Ossining right off of Route 9. So, and that's how we left it. And then last week, Marcus and I went to an open house in Peekskill. We went up to talk to them, and Marcus can verify this. I'm terrible sometimes. I don't care, though. I said, so listen, my first question to you is, can you do eminent domain? That's what I really need to know. And they're like, no, we can't. We're not, blah, blah, blah. I said, good. So once again, I'm going to be clear to you that this is not a benefit to the Village of Buchanan. There is a better way to come in. Like, why are we doing this if there's no benefit? And and as I found out today, that the town of Cortland, without communicating with us, is passing a resolution to issue correspondence opposing the Clean Path New York in the Village of Buchanan in our Lens Cove area. So they want to come into Lens Cove almost at the point and come like straight in through our park, which has environmental issues. We've had dumping there before, so there's some environmental issues there. Plus, we have our old garbage dump there. As you can see, it's still settling. So if it's not a benefit to the village, then, So now the town, I thank them for their support. We, of course, thank them for their support in this. But we would prefer that there's better communication going forward about that. So I would ask the board if they would like to also send a letter to the Clean Path people to let them know, or tell me, does the board think this is a good thing for the village?
No. Absolutely not.
So,
No, unless they're willing to clean up Lens Cove.
yeah, that's almost $1 million cleanup,
There you
yes.
go.
Yeah.
And it's worth it to the
Yeah.
village.
Yeah. So then they would be taking, once they come in, they'll be taking a left. So they're going through a lot of infrastructure. Once they come in through our Lens Cove, they're going to John Walsh Boulevard somehow, and I don't know. So the approximate time that they're saying, the time frame is 2028 that line will be done. I don't see that happening, but that's what they told us. So we had a nice conversation with them. Marcus, did you want to share anything else with that conversation?
I'm sure they'll figure it out.
No, I think you made it very clear what the position of the village was, and they listened, and instead it's doing in the design phase, and they'll come back to us when they're ready.
So, but if we can get a letter together to get that out with the board's displeasure with that plan. Sure, absolutely.
And just to make it very clear, the only reason this is happening is to get electricity down to New York City,
Correct.
because they're closer to Indian Point. They actually mentioned how many coal-fired plants, gas-fired plants that they open up?
Well, I
Was it
believe to
9?
replace Indian Point was 2.
Two.
To itself.
So they want to shut that down, so therefore they have to take care of New York City. So all this is to take care of New York City. That's the only reason they're doing this.
Well, if you remember correctly, about 10 years ago or so, 12 years ago, 10 years, there was another line that was going to come from Albany, a 1 megawatt line, or I should say a 1,000 megawatt line, DC, to come down that exact same route and to come out around 11th Street and be converted to AC. And that was paid for. The state was forcing Con Edison to do that. It was going to be about $1.1 billion, and that's why our Con Edison assessments were down for those years, because they were going to be reimbursed. So this isn't the first time that this has happened. And this DC line was postulated to be put in, I believe it was 2014, and that's what the Stop the Buzz was. And that was before any announcement of the closure of Indian Point. It's purely for energy.
And you know what? There was something in the papers, and it stopped, because that's the Hudson Champlain line, and they were talking about going in on the other side of the river in Rockland, but they were offering those communities, like, all kinds of things. So, and then it was just in the paper not too long about the Hudson Champlain line, they had to remove that from consideration temporarily, so I don't know where that is. So it was going to be one on one side of the river, one here, coming here. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Always come to Buchanan, huh? I don't think so. Anyhow, for anyone that wants to know more about this, the Examiner News will have an article, High Voltage Cable Path for Clean Energy Plan Raises Cortland's Ire, and also the Village of Buchanan. So, I just wanted to mention that so people can get the paper. See, they had more of an adversarial thing. Clean Path was insistent that the cable had come out at Lents Cove, and Becker said, "They told me, too bad, we're big New York State with $1 billion behind us, we're not going to stop it." See, that's not the conversation they had with me. So, but thank you, Town of Cortland, for your support, and we'll work on better communication. Nope, we're good.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thank you,
David.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
your time.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
Okay. Do you want to go to George Palmer's things too, so George can leave?
That's what's next. George?
George Palmer, Village Engineer.
George, the first item is the change order number 1 for the Route 9A sidewalk. Explain to the board what's going on.
Sure. Good evening, Board, Mayor, trustees. Okay, when we started this project, we met with the DOT several times. We went through our design, and we submitted our plans to Con Ed and to all the utility companies. And when we got out there, utility lines aren't where they say they are, and we had to make some changes. So there's a major gas transmission main. It's a 12-inch main, high pressure, that goes down that side of the street. We met with Con Ed, the DOT. We went through various options, and they basically said, you got a choice: move the curb back, move the drainage forward, or vice versa, and move some things around. So between the DOT, Con Ed, and us, the most economic, viable solution was to leave the gas transmission main where it was, because that would take months, if not longer, to move. And put the guide rail. We had a guide rail that was on top of the wall. We moved it to the front. If you go out there today, matter of fact, it was finished yesterday.
Then we're not paying.
What's that?
I said, well, then we won't pay. It's already done.
It's already done.
Yeah, so forget it.
So
Thanks.
we moved the guide rail to the front. We put a fence. Now you see a nice little fence on top of the wall. And when we sorted out all the pluses and the minuses and all the credits and all the additions, we came up with $5,952.82. And just so everyone knows, there's when you put together a DOT job, you have what's called field change order. So there's a $10,000 line item in there for in case something comes up. So this money is not coming out of the village, it's already in the job. So it's, to me, we sorted it out, this is the best solution. You look at the the curb, it's not perfectly straight, the drainage goes back, it goes back a little bit and comes in. Couldn't push it out any further because the gas main is about an inch away from the catch basins. So that's where we ended up, so.
Well, it
so
does
that's
look
what this-
much nicer. I mean, it was a long process, and thank God it's done, because I know people were getting angry with the traffic and everything, but, you know, we got grant money for that, so, you know, I think it looks nice, and it's safer
It's
for
safer.
people. We have a lot more people walking here in the village, so it's better walkability.
Yep. So I was working on T21 grants back in 1990s to get that stretch of sidewalk done, and now it's like 30 years later. I'm seeing it's kind of neat.
And you're still working on it, George.
Still working on it.
So, George, did Con Ed's gas main cost us any money?
No. So to move that gas main would have been over $100,000. So this is the solution that everybody agreed to. You'll see a utility pole out there.
Yeah.
That utility pole will be moved because it's in the deflection zone of the guide rail. To move that utility pole will take a year because there's two main aerials on top of it, and those two main aerials feed up and down Route 9A. So just to move that pole and move that aerial is over a year, because they have to splice it, they have to put a piece in, and they have to do it when there's not a high demand. We have electric for air conditioners, so they have to do it in the winter, then you have to get on a list. So, long story short,
Yeah.
that's gonna be, so the project's done, but you're eventually gonna see that pole get moved, so.
Yeah, that's another process.
It's another process, and actually moving that was over $150,000.
Wow.
So, but that's what everyone opted for. It's in the public right away, so Con Ed as a utility company has to move. So it's a DOT project, so there's no, the cost of the village is, you're still nothing because you're under that was paid for by the state,
Good.
so.
Good.
And they still have to finish going down the road there. There was poles that were being replaced, and then the wires were being switched, and that's been going on like, they come here for a while, the company, the last one, they were from Georgia or from down south. They come for a while, do a little bit of work, and then they go again.
Yes, they have a lot of those double poles, as they call them, all over the place. And it's crazy what they do. They'll be in one location, and if they finish like one pole or two poles in that location, and something else comes up on the list, they move and they go. Their means and methods of getting it done are they're
Yeah.
mind-numbing.
I think they would stay and finish it and move on.
A lot of those poles are owned by Verizon as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, you come down the road, and all of a sudden it's Con Ed, then Verizon, then Con Ed. So it mixes use and ownership. So you look at the poles, you look at the numbers, and you say, oh, why does it change? Because it's changing ownership. So it's not very simple. So that's the change order. So we would need tonight the board's.
No, it'll be the August 2nd meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. August
Next
2nd
Tuesday.
meeting.
Yeah.
You get the approval. So.
The next item is the sole source. These are really two pieces, is George wrote a memo regarding some work on the water stations. So we found out that they were only available to one manufacturer who had the entire region. So talking to George, since we didn't have a sole source process, so George is working on the sole source letter from the company. But also I realized it wasn't in your procurement policy, so I also want to update your procurement policy, certain items that we didn't have, that is a little outdated, so in your packet is the change in the procurement policy, but also at the next meeting is to retroactively approve the sole source of this purchase, but in the future, as long as we get a sole source letter, we don't have to go through this process and delay the work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had sole source before, and we've just had the rationale from the engineer as to why we've sole sourced it. So why are we changing it now? Because we followed the New York State procurement policy when it came to sole source, if I'm not mistaken, and we did that with several valves in the system years ago. So why do we have to change what we're doing now?
Because it wasn't in your procurement policy, and then, so I want to incorporate that in the procurement policy as well. And with a sole source, I don't know what's done in the past, so I thought he should come to the board and approve the sole source. So that's what we're doing now. he's gonna approve the sole source, but including the procurement policy as well, which
So-
wasn't there.
So what you do is you save a step. So instead of, I have this big long letter, it says clay valves are what you have, basically taking out the guts of it, putting something in. And getting that, you'd get a letter from the sole source company, and you wouldn't have to go through this process all the time.
Okay, so the reason being is we're streamlining it and taking a
Correct.
step out. We've followed the rules and regulations of the state through our previous procurement policy and our sole source letters from the engineers. We're just changing it to eliminate one step.
Yes.
So it's not saying that we were out of alignment with the rules
No,
and
no,
regulations.
no.
We're just, okay. So
Yes.
I didn't understand why, because we
Yes.
had done plenty of sole sources
Yes.
before without
Yes.
changing the rules.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Correct.
So that's the sole source. So the next meeting will be two items. One is to approve the sole source of this project, but also then update on procurement policy to match what everything you've been doing.
And George, what is the timeframe to receive those things? Because it seems like it takes a long time to get things anymore.
So, yes, so just to give you an idea, we had a meter between Peekskill and Buchanan sent out for replacement in, was it February? And we just got it back 2 weeks ago. So that's 6 months, 5 months
Wow.
to send something out, get some back. We had another part for the sewage treatment plant. We were talking about geyser pumps. And same thing, went out at the same time back in February. We just got it probably 2-3 weeks ago as well. So there's some supply chain issues still
Some, yeah.
kind of going on.
So how are we calculating our payments to the city of Peekskill for the purchase of water?
So we are on a 4-inch meter, that's the 12-inch, so there's two.
Okay.
So if you look at this memo, there's, so what we're ordering are all the 4-inch valves for this year, for all the pits. So that each pit has 8s, 2 8s, 1 8 in one pit, 1 8 in another, 12 in the other, and they all have 4s. So we're running through the low flow line. It's basically-
So these are all mechanical reads, they're not ultrasonics?
These are all, they are, they're, I can't think of the word. They're ultrasonic, yes.
They're all
The
ultrasonic?
the meter is the ultrasonic, but the valves themselves, that's all mechanical
Yeah,
inside. That's
It's a
pressure reducing,
Pressure flow
sustaining.
limiting, yeah.
So that's all just take out the guts, they're
Mhm.
all metal parts, rings, gaskets, whatnot, and then take them out and put them in there. So we're doing all the 4-inch, so at the next meeting, that's what we're looking to replace.
There's a multi-year project that in your memo, you have to broken up into two separate years.
Yeah, so since there's a timing issue, ordering everything and having it sit, unless the board wants to order it, in the memo, we get into this year would be 24,000. Next year would be 21,000, and then the year after that would be 15. So we try to spread out the cost. I mean, you could order it, try to order all at once if you wanted to. That's up to the board. Let Marcus know before the next meeting. But to try to get the product, then to try to get it out there, you know, we just said 6 months. We're hoping to get these valves. You know, we sent out a memo. We tried to lock in the cost as quickly as we
Right.
can without prices changing. So to get them all, then install them, you're already into next year, hopefully, for this year's work. So, and then we waited this year because the budget gets passed, what is it, June? So make sure the money's there, then go. So money's in the fund.
Correct.
In the water fund, yeah.
For the water fund, yes.
Okay.
Okay?
And then I think, Entergy, we have that fund that kicks in. They are putting money towards infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
So that money from Entergy for infrastructure can be used for this
Can be used,
because
okay.
Peekskill is giving us water. So there's a rationale for using some of that money to pay for that stuff.
Mhm.
So that's another reason for the staggered.
So you're looking for a decision now? Do we need a
Next-
resolution,
For
or
the-
what do you want to do?
Next meeting.
Next.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
August
we'll,
2nd meeting, you'll
we'll
approve it.
approve for the
We're
24.
going to approve the old one. All right,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
he's talking about because of the lead time to order more now so we can get them 6 months early.
Yeah, you're gonna.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, you're gonna
So-
approve all,
So
of-
we're
you're
gonna-
gonna approve all of them at one point, and then we'll look at the finances, to see, we'll do a PO, and then start ordering them. So
Yes,
the idea is
yes.
to order everything, get approval now, and then work with George to
Okay.
get everything ordered.
Yes.
Do we have money in the budget for all of
Yes.
them? Okay, all
Would there
right.
be savings involved if you ordered them all at once rather than stagger it?
It could be, only because year over year, price goes up 2-3%.
Yeah.
So that would be the only savings. But supply chain kind of, I don't know.
Okay.
And the important parts, I'd rather have it ready
Yep.
and get it ready.
I
for
just
the-
figured I'd ask, that's all.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Okay, the next item is the update on the boiler replacement. Some questions the last time regarding the engineer's course.
So, yeah, we went through the, so at the last meeting, we went through the, what Siemens had provided. That was one of the topics that we discussed. And what Siemens had provided wasn't as detailed as
It needed to
we
be.
would like. There was no model number. They quoted the model numbers of what was there, but they didn't get into the specifics of how to replace it, what to replace it with, so forth. So they made some general comments on, it's old, you should replace it with something more efficient, more or less.
So we paid for them to tell us we had an old oil burner.
Yeah, you did.
How much did we pay? 60,000? What was
It
the
was
original
about-
bill? 72,000?
Yeah, I think it was like
Negotiated
55.
it down to 58 or 60,000?
Yeah, correct.
And that was the product that we got? To tell us that we had an old oil burner?
Well, that was part of it.
That was part, yeah.
Well, they
well,
also
this-
told us we had old windows in a bad.
Well, we
Yeah,
took care of those
air conditioning
windows.
system.
But that's, yeah, it didn't get into the specifics.
So how do you bid on it? Just,
So-
me being a layman, how would you tell somebody that, hey, you have to spend $85,000 for a new oil burner, but you don't have any specifications? How do you do something like that?
For Siemens, for
Yeah,
what Siemens did?
yeah. They said we need $85,000 for a boiler. You have to base it on something, not a 50-year-old nameplate.
That's,
Sounds like
It's-
fraud.
it's not,
Maybe we should get our money back.
it's not detailed in here, but,
Good thing I
So-
voted against it.
so. So, with that, we went back to all three, so the other issue that came up was the existing oil tank that's out there. All three of them excluded it, and we now, at the direction of the board at the last meeting, asked all three to include it. I got one price today, which was, I think, $3,500 to add that into the cost. And basically, there's two paths that could go down with the oil burner. I'm sorry, with the storage tank. One is to abandon in place, which if it's an issue where it's too close to the generator and we don't want to undermine the generator, what they would do is basically cut the top, swab it all out. Well, they would suck out the product first, swab it all out, fill it with sand. The other thing they would do is they drill a hole in the bottom, and the county makes you test the soil to make sure it's all clean. So that's one procedure, and the other one is to just shore it up and take it out. So that's the two paths that could go down. But we won't know that until we get to that point. And both of them, all three of them are providing prices to do that. So,
So how many gallons is that? It's a big tank.
3,000.
3,000.
Okay. So, all right. And we're definitely going to go for the gas.
Yes,
I guess we better do it before they say no.
yes.
'Cause
So,
they're,
hopefully by your August meeting, we will have all three updated prices for you. They didn't seem to vary very much between company to company, only because each company, some of them are larger, and some of them are smaller, and some of them have larger overheads, so their price is higher, and some of them, so, because the issue was, are we comparing apples to apples? Or are they all considering the same thing? And looking at them, you'd say, oh, well, this guy's missing this, or this guy has that. They all pretty much have the same thing, but we're gonna make sure they include it all in their proposal. Because one of them also mentioned that the chimney's not adequate,
Right.
and all three of them
Yeah.
said, yes, we all know the chimney's not adequate, and we all included it. So,
Yeah.
that was another issue that was mentioned.
Yeah, because definitely when you go from oil, which burns wet, you're going to gas, which burns drier, so they'll have to put the insert in there to protect,
Yeah.
so we don't have a problem.
Or
Yeah.
they said another avenue out.
Oh, okay,
side
another venting.
discharge to the building or
Okay.
something like that.
All
So
right.
that's another option.
Okay.
And then there's still going to be a separate charge for testing for the PCB and the lead and the asbestos?
So that's all separate too. Whoever comes out there would test for, let's say there's insulation wrapped around the furnace or something.
Right.
You'd test it.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sure there is.
so that's where we're at.
Good.
So I'll have hopefully I'll have the three revised proposals for the next meeting.
All right, thank
Great.
you, George. I know that took a while. It was a little crazy.
No, it was all good questions, and all of them said, yeah, we'll update it, it's not a problem. So,
Okay. My other question, and I've kind of mentioned this before, every year we do road work. I know every year you go out with the highway foreman and pick roads that need to be done. I want your opinion on this year, what to do, since the costs have definitely doubled.
So-
And Anthony would know best with that. He works with the blacktop and construction. So,
yeah, the cost of asphalt kind of mirrors the cost of gas in a lot of ways, because they're made from the same process, the refracting process. So we talked to one of the companies that makes the asphalt, and they told us how they have a barge they got a barge near here that's in the Yonkers area, and one out in Long Island that supplies the asphaltic cement that binds all the material, and they said it was going up. And this was is beginning of the summer, and they said, if you are planning to do something, you may want to hold off and maybe just do some crack sealing, because we don't know where the prices are going. So that's kind of where we're at. I know the town has a piggyback clause. If you really wanted to do a road or had to do a road, you could pick a road and use their numbers to do road work. But we've waited a year in the past and done kind of what we said before, bulk. You get bulk when you do more roads in larger quantities. You can save money too. So if there's a 2% increase this year, maybe because we're doing more, it evens itself out. So
for the prices drop. It's kind of hard to look into the crystal ball.
Yeah,
And
it is.
It's a tough call.
it is. So, yeah, prices in the beginning of summer were reaching $5 a gallon for gas, and now they're dropping down to $4.20. So that's a 20% change is a lot.
Yeah.
So-
And we're still going to, we're still on schedule to finish up last year's because we ran out of time with the weather.
Yes, and the weather, and we were making some decisions on some curbs, whether to do some curbs near Village Hall. One of the residents wanted curbs, driveway openings and so forth. So the contractor said, you know what? I'll wait till the end of September. I'll come back when you guys can sort out, your issues with your residents and go from there. So he's coming back, scheduled to come back in September.
Okay, good.
Is it gonna be the same price?
Get that.
Same price,
Okay.
That's the contract from last year, right?
yes.
So he's probably hoping the prices go down by September.
Yes,
too.
Yeah, that's probably why he agreed to postpone it.
That's why,
Absolutely.
he agreed to
Yeah.
postpone it because things were going down.
Yeah.
So it works out for us and for him. If we get it done before winter, and he can hold his price. So that's where we're at with last year's paving.
Okay, good.
So, and if you
What
want to
streets are left?
So outside of Village Hall,
Yep.
and we have to do Henry Street from
Fourth
Fourth to.
to- Tate by Bannon Avenue.
Yeah, we think we were stopping by Bannon.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
And then another project that we're doing with Entergy that we might want to talk about is Broadway, going toward for a plank.
It's bad.
It's really,
Yeah.
It's really bad.
yeah. So if we could get that money from Entergy, use that piggyback clause to maybe do that before winter, I drove it today and I'm going out and looking at Let's Go over the parking lot with all the do's and do's.
Yeah, that's why I asked what
That's
streets were
settling.
left, because Broadway is really just chewed up
So
badly.
I'll talk to Stephanie about how that money's being.
Right on down to Lens Cove, because you got all those trucks coming now off that Louisa Street exit, and they're just,
Yeah.
you know,
One side of the street is nice because they did the gas line, and the other side of the
Yep.
street is.
it's really bad.
But you know, George, I asked Marcus, because there's markings there again on the road, on Broadway and once again on Blakely. So I asked Marcus to contact Con Ed. I don't know if they're thinking of digging up again. I don't know why, but it's also flagged right by Blakely Avenue, that corner of Blakely and 9A. So it's like, why is this all marked out?
Sometimes, I know there's one developer, the Griffin property. Sometimes if they're doing a survey, they call for a survey utility mark out. So the
811.
surveyor can go out there and pick up utilities. So you might be seeing the marks on the road because somebody's doing some surveying. Maybe the Griffin property is doing some
We might not be
surveying.
seeing that much longer. Anyhow, but, you know, so Marcus is checking on, if they do dig it up again, I think we really need them to ask, they have to do the whole road. So if not, you're right, Dan, that's settling over there. It's wetlands, it's settling, and
Yeah.
it's old, the road is old. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's something we could talk about, we could look at that,
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
yeah.
So hopefully by the next meeting again, we'll have an update for you
Okay, good,
on that.
all right.
What monies we can use from the Entergy to
Mhm.
pay for that.
Mhm.
So,
All right, George, thank you.
Thanks, George.
Anything else for us? We'll talk. Our
Sorry.
people, my people will talk to your people.
no, I'm all right. I'm sorry.
No, I was just kidding. I was just kidding. I was just kidding. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, George.
Okay, no
Appreciate.
problem. Have a
Good to
night.
see you instead of on
Thanks, George.
TV.
Yeah. TV doesn't work so good on my computer.
Oh,
For some reason, my computer doesn't allow me to do the face the camera.
Oh,
For some reason, the Microsoft program, virus protection, kind of cut the camera off, so
Oh.
the camera doesn't work. I don't have any luck with computers.
no. I'm with you. Thanks, George. Okay, what else do we have this evening? I have a few things. Our Buchanan Seniors are celebrating their 50th anniversary in August, the end of August. And because of COVID, they've had money in the budget. They have like $18,000, $19,000 for buses. That hasn't been used. Also, we're having a very difficult time getting a senior advisor. Very difficult time. So, and, you know, I've even asked out at the town of Cortland. So there's money in that budget. So what the seniors would like to use is some of their budget money. They'd like to have a luncheon, I think it's August 30th, right, Cindy? It's something like that. It's like August 30th. And also, they would like to buy a commemorative 50-year tote bag. So I just want to check to make sure that the board is okay with that.
I'm fine with it.
I love the idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Okay, because we have the money in the budget, so it's not, you know.
We're gonna be there one day.
Absolutely.
Sooner than you think, Anthony, sooner than you think. The years go by fast. Also, somebody approached me, not for this year, but something, I just want to put this out here. The Little League had approached about getting some type of snack bar or having some type of a snack bar there. Originally, I thought what we have in the pavilion, that came, Bob picked it up, Bob Wheeler picked it up from Holtec, and they didn't have any left, but I thought originally maybe that type of a building that they could use to have some type of a snack bar, but I just want to put that out there for your thoughts for further discussion.
Good.
Tomorrow is another exciting Indian Point Oversight Decommissioning Board meeting. Starts at 6 o'clock. We do have it, thank you Sharon for putting that out on Facebook, so there, if you would like to come in on Facebook or Town of Cortland, the meeting starts at 6, it goes from 6 to 9, and always some interesting comments that are made there. And that's all I have. Anybody else? Any other comments? We are going to go into executive session because we have a few things to discuss.
Okay.
Sean, do you have anything?
Yes, last week Stephanie helped me out with putting together the version of the accessory apartment law change, the way you had requested with the format that you're accustomed to.
Okay.
So I sent that out today. I thought I sent it out last week. When I was checking my outboxes, apparently I didn't. But in lieu of any more, I haven't received any other comments from the planning board, the zoning board, or any other board members. And I did send it out in the format you guys would like. I'd like to set a date for a public hearing in October to get information from the public before we have a final draft amendment, as well as if the building inspector could submit his comments in writing so that they can be included, or, you know, we'll see how that works out. But I would like to have the process started. I know it's been, I think we started talking about this in May or June. So I would like to get it started. So if we could set public notice for a public hearing in October, that would.
I'd like the board to review it and read it, and I'd like the building inspector's input, and maybe we could discuss at the next workshop, the August workshop.
Sure.
We can review it and discuss it
Well, then we
then.
would have to pass a resolution for a public
August.
hearing then.
So we'd
right.
have to pass a resolution in September for the
September.
public hearing in October. Yeah, we still have time to do that, yeah, sure.
Also, we had talked about, or I had asked about hiring a real estate agent to sell the property on Albany Post Road in Blakely. I know Marcus came up with 2 names. However, we don't see a resolution to hire them, or do we need a resolution to hire them, or what do we?
Yeah, we could do it on the August 2nd meeting if the board would like to do
Okay,
that.
so if we could add that to next month's, the August 2nd, all right. I don't, whoever you guys want to hire, 2%, 4%, I don't think it really,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I think they're from the same realtor
Yeah.
anyway. so
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
same
they're a little
company.
bit-
One is the broker,
Yeah.
so.
So if we can have a resolution for that, I'd appreciate it. Also, last month, we had talked about the lot coverage, and Marcus had said you were gonna send a letter to the building inspector holding any other lot coverage violations in abeyance until we had further discussion. Did you ever send that letter to the building inspector?
I told him, I'll follow with an email, but I did tell him he's not.
Could you forward, could you copy us on that, please?
Yeah, I haven't done anything yet, I just told him to do it based on, he was there at the same meeting, so.
I understand, I'm kinda like a formal guy, you know, if it's not in paper, it never was sent, you know.
And that was something, while David was here, that was something we should have asked him. But that's okay, because he had come up with a proposal, so,
Oh, David Smith.
Yeah.
Also, months ago, and we had talked about it just recently with David, about the zoning amendment to allow for a special permit for uses that we don't postulate. And I know we had talked about that when the person was here for the limousine service, but I don't think there was any instructions to come up with any formal zoning text amendment. Does anybody know where we left that?
I don't remember.
I remember there was a discussion as to who would write this up, and I think we should get that ball rolling now. You know, is there any reason why we can't have some type of zoning text amendment to allow a change in the table of bulk regulations without having to go through a 3-month process of changing a zoning law? You know, something similar to the way that Mr. Smith was talking about, to allow an applicant to come before us for something that we have never postulated, instead of just kicking people out and saying, well, you have to talk to the board about changing the zoning. Do you remember the conversations?
And is this more in reference to a limousine
It's a reference to
company?
anything, because this
Okay.
has come
All
up
right,
several times.
I just want to clarify it.
You know,
yeah.
it started with the Greentown Road applications about when Nick had suggested that about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And every once in a while, somebody comes up with these ideas when it never comes to fruition, because our zoning code is very restrictive when it comes to new uses that nobody has ever envisioned.
Well,
And
I think what it is that one sentence at the end that states, you know, all other uses are denied,
yeah.
just
Yeah, I do
eliminating.
remember David discussing it.
But
And
the
the- and the
problem
tip-
is, we have to come up with a way that doesn't give blanket as of right use
Mm-hmm.
for everything. And his
Yeah.
language was good with special use permit. I had suggested something along those lines in different zones,
Mm-hmm.
but if we can have something where there is still oversight, and we could still entertain people's applications for new uses.
Right.
It's in the benefit of the village, because a lot of people run away thinking it's gonna take me 3 or 4 months
Yeah.
to even postulate a use. Why would I even invest the time and energy when it's not even gonna be, a possibility?
All right. Yeah, I wish we could have had that discussion with David tonight, but that's,
No, I
that's-
do remember the discussion, and I remember David said there was a way in which to word it, like what Sean's referring to, but
Mhm.
like I said, too bad he's not here, because we could have had the discussion, but.
Yeah,
I can reach out to him,
okay.
and I like striking that last line for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
What we've done in the past when we had no other way to do this was the zoning board would interpret a use significantly similar to
Mhm.
that kind of language, and would approve things that they saw that was significantly similar to a barber shop, let's say, or
Yeah, because it's
Or-
kind of like an ease of doing business thing, right? It's
Yeah.
people come in and now all of a sudden they've got to jump through hoops in order to try and even
And our-
understand whether or not it's a possibility, rather than just know up front if they're spinning their wheels.
And
So-
some municipalities actually list everything
They-
permitted. Some say if it's
Yeah,
not
ours-
prohibited
yeah.
here, then it is permitted.
Ours is very narrow compared to some of the other local
Yeah.
municipalities.
So I'll reach out to David.
I definitely would
Thanks,
like to move that along. We have a lot of changes that are coming up with different developers with different issues. Somebody else might come along and have another idea. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent, we should at least allow them the opportunity for a discussion without making it a 3 or 4 month process where they have to invest money and waste their time. In executive session, we'll be discussing some contracts and employee stuff.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
that's all I have then. Thanks.
You're good?
No,
Dan,
all
anything
good.
for you?
No.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make one other mention. We're talking about we're going to be talking about lot coverage and possibly changing it. It's something we'll look at, but I really, and Sean, you're aware of this, the ADU law. So we have a law on our books for accessory apartments if people fit into certain criteria, and that's what we're going to be discussing at the workshop and have a public hearing in October. But what the state wants to do, it's on hold right now, but it's coming back fast and furious next year. It's the accessory dwelling unit that will allow, it's going to override our zoning. So in one way, we're talking about lot coverage. If that accessory dwelling unit law does get passed, and it probably will, between 2 and 3 in the morning, just like the Pomo Bridge. Oh, wow, did I say that? Yeah, I did. So what we're talking about, lot coverage, is just going to be, it's going to be moved. So say we do go to the 40%, then people are allowed to either put another parcel, another building, or add on to their building, and you could potentially be looking a lot closer to 100%. So we have sent a letter, the board has sent a letter, that we're not interested in that. So I would encourage everyone, if they don't want to see suburbia die in New York State, I would very, very much encourage you, before you vote this year, understand who is in favor of this accessory dwelling unit law. Also, we found out, Marcus can send it to you, Westchester County already has a model ordinance for the ADUs. So if you don't think this is happening, it's happening. So it will change the makeup of suburbia, our village, and all the other communities throughout the state. So I just wanted to mention that. I honestly, at this point, since the legislature in the state is a big proponent of it, I don't know. I don't know. What do we do? Do we go up to the state capitol? Do we get everybody and protest on the state capitol steps? I don't know. But this will kill your communities. It will kill your village, your whole village. It's just sad. It's craziness, but beware. That's on the horizon. So what we're talking about with lot coverage in the end might just be a moot issue. Okay, so moving into executive session, I'm making a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel and contractual issues. That covers it all. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.